Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 495, the Golden Age of Television. This is another one of those rare cases where I knew some of this before it actually came out on Criterion, as in that I've actually seen some of the broadcasts. When I was 14, I think, I forget if it was, I think it was my dad who wanted to do this, or just some combination, but there was a rebroadcast on PBS, and actually that's where all this comes from. A rebroadcast of the Playhouse 90 performance of Requiem for a Heavyweight, and this was also in. They were also showing American Masters episode of about Rod Serling, called Rod Serling Submitted for Your Approval, and it talks about his life. So that was sort of my first exposures to live television. Now, yes, it's interesting that Criterion goes into, well, it explores all avenues of visual media, and television is definitely a visual media. It also reaffirms that, yes, television does indeed follow Sturgeon's law. 90% of science fiction is crap, 90% of anything is crap. And it has followed this rule since day one. And this is an example of that 10% of television that's worth remembering, worth noting. You know, there's always been crap shows. It's just now we've seen sort of a plethora of crap shows. But I want to talk about some good stuff here. Now, first off, what is live television? Well, live television was a convenient linguistic shorthand for shows that aired usually at late night starting from about 52, 53 to 1950, actually to 1960, I believe was the end of it. But these would be once a week, although I think the three networks had their own versions of it, but usually they would air on late nights around, I think, 8 or 9 at night. And these would be these were different than television shows. Obviously fit into either one or two categories. You either have a live show that's on a stage and it's performed live, but you also are aware that there's an audience there, and then there's also shows that are filmed in advance or recorded in advance and then edited together and then rebroadcasts. But this was kind of a weird hybrid of the two different worlds, where it's a live broadcast, but it's all done as if it were actually filmed beforehand, and it gives the air of having it being a theater production. And this was the appeal of the live television shows, such as the Kraft Television Hour, the United States Steel Hour, Playhouse 90. There were a lot of different shows or a lot of different program umbrellas, and these were sometimes these would be adaptations of already established works, but most of the time there were actually original shows. This would be, and it would later become a very interesting launch pad for a lot of careers. On the writing side, this would be the domain of, I mentioned Rod Serling. That's how I first came to know about this, but also Paddy Chayefsky, Reginald Rose, to name a few. This would also be the launch pad of several directors like Sidney Lumet, John Frankenheimer, Franklin Schaffner, to name a few. And also in terms of acting, this would be this would be the launch pad for Rod Steiger, Andy Griffith, Richard Keeley, Julie Harris, Paul Newman, Jack Palance, Kim Hunter, Cliff Robinson, Piper Laurie, again, to name a few. So it was this, this interesting time where, careers, and then it continued on. In fact, in this collection has 8 episodes, and in this particular collection, 4 of them would later become feature films in their own right. And I'm only going to, I will mention each of them, but I'm probably going to focus more on the ones that I personally like the most. It's one of those collections where you pick your favorites, or you watch all of them and then you find out what your favorites are. So the first episode on here is Marty, which, yes, that would later become a feature film in its own right. And this is one of my favorites. And the story is about looks at I think he's supposed to be in his late 30s, but he lives in Brooklyn with his mother, and he is a bachelor, and everybody loves harping on him on this. It's like, when are you going to get married? And especially since he has lots of other siblings who have either already been married or have just gotten married, and everybody's always like, why aren't you married? Why didn't you find a nice girl? And it's like, whatever. And it's just this constant pressure, and he doesn't feel that he is worth anybody's time, and he's probably content just to remain a bachelor for the rest of his life. That slowly starts to change when he goes to a dance hall one night and meets this woman who was ungraciously dumped, and they start to hit it off, and this really sort of this is kind of what to expect from live television. Is there were a lot of plays and shows that were able to illuminate various social conditions, social standings. It steps away from a kind of romantic realism or an escapism or the fantastical, and it deals more with human drama. So in this case, it's looking at Brooklyn, and the not so much confirmed bachelors, but just the older bachelors that are who keep having this pressure of getting married, but can't seem to make a go of it for whatever reason. And of course, the funny thing is that while you don't have that pressure as much with why aren't you married yet? I still feel like there's still traces of that there is this pressure to be paired off, and that the idea of living alone is somehow anathema to culture. It's just that we have different. It's just that we have different. I guess we have different parameters, I guess, or something. But there's still that. While it may not be overt in the same way as in Marty, there's still that pressure. Maybe I'm just sensitive to it, but oh well. That's why I like Marty. Other episodes. There's also Patterns, which was which was an original by, and Marty was also original, Patty Chayefsky. But Patterns was an original by Rod Serling, and this was the play that really was the first big hit for Serling, and then it would set a precedent that he would continue on afterwards. But this was the one that really got him attention as a writer, and certainly as a writer for television. Patterns is, and this is another favorite. Patterns is interesting because the story is about a young executive who's brought in, and he is going to be a part of this firm, and he finds out that he's actually there to replace an older executive who is ever nearing the grave, and it's a kind of a battle of wills. The older executive is more humane in his dealings, but the guy who's actually in charge is more ruthless, and he's more by the numbers. He's always looking for ways to be efficient, and again the profit motive. And of course the young executive is caught in the middle between the two, because on the one hand he starts to feel a certain fondness for him, but for the executive that he's meant to replace, but he also wants to be able to advance his own career because he is young. And in a way, it's a what I like about this is that it's a well thought out critique of business. Most of the time, whenever a story is meant to be critical about business or capitalism, that it's money grubbers, it's people who don't care about the workers and all that stuff. Because there's so much of it, it feels very played out. And yes, I'm a bigger fan of the free market, so maybe that's part of it. But also, I think it's because it's so prevalent. It's one of those things where you feel like this has already been said before, and this is not really interesting. And I feel that this is a very even-handed critique, because at the end, there's not the obvious. You would expect that the idealism will triumph and business can go to hell, but actually at the end, what happens, without giving too much away, he is the young executive is challenged to prove it. If you think this is a good idea, if you have principles you want to stand by, then fight for it. And in a way, it showcases what free market at its best should do. It should be about doing the best way, having the best, most efficient way of doing things, so that everybody can be more productive. There could be, and in the end, everybody benefits from the expanded production and having more efficient means of doing things, but also being considerate of other things as well. So it's all about trying to find better ways of doing things and making things and selling things and so forth, so that everybody improves. It's not being stagnant. It's not sticking to one thing. And so the challenge is that, okay, if you think this is a good idea, if you think that this will work for the life of the business, then fight for it. Actually do it. So it's not that I'm going to crush you like a bug. I want you dead. I want your house burned. None of that. It's fight for it. And I felt that was like, okay, that's really good. And considering that this was written as a kind of critique about one phrase that Rod Serling was famous for saying is that this is about the price tag that hangs on success. But it's a very even-handed one. It's not. It doesn't go into polemics. And I feel that if you're going to make something related to an issue, it should be done intelligently. You shouldn't browbeat or insult your audience. And that's why I respect patterns a lot. Another broadcast that's on here is No Time for Sergeants. And actually, I knew the feature film before I knew the television broadcast. In fact, for the longest time, it wasn't until I think a year after this came out when the feature film finally came out. But I saw this all thanks to my dad, because he has a penchant for humor, especially with humor about the military, and more specifically about the United States Air Force. And yes, this was the broadcast that actually launched Andy Griffith's career. So if you know anything about No Time for Sergeants, it's basically that's what that is. Interestingly, I was a bit disappointed with the and I think it's because of the limitations of live television, because it's all it's all done live. Well, it was done live in broadcast. What you're actually watching are kinescope copies of the broadcast, which was basically you had a 16 or 35 millimeter camera that's recording the broadcast on is actually filming a television monitor. So as the broadcast is made, this film camera is filming it at the same rate as the broadcast, which they would then be reshown for the West Coast. That's the reason why you had a kinescope copy of it. So the East Coast got the genuine live benefit, and then the West Coast got it after the fact. So that's why the transfers seem a bit limited, but this is only because of the source. And actually, the reason why this is called the golden age of television is that when the kinescope copies were found in the early 80s, and they were kept and not really rebroadcast because it didn't look particularly good. But with the coming advent of digital technology, particularly with video, VHS, and so forth, those were ported over. So actually, I think the source of it is not necessarily the original 16 millimeter negatives, but rather it's a VHS. I think it's more from the VHS copies of that, maybe, or maybe they were able to go back. I forget exactly. But anyways, so be expected to be disappointed. But in a way, I kind of like it because it kind of shows what you could do, what you were capable of doing at the time. So, and it doesn't entirely affect what you're seeing. It still comes through. It just comes through in a bit of a fuzz. But I think it's not bad. It's just what it was. But anyways, so yeah, so everything was done live, and so it was a matter of being creative as far as what kind of sets you used and how things were played out, where the camera was, and it was done right there, which means any kind of flubs are there. You pretty much had one shot to do all of it in terms of everybody. So it's a very, very stressful situation. John Frankenheimer famously said that he would lose several pounds per broadcast just because of all the stress and the tension of just making sure that everything works well, that actors know their lines, they can hit their marks, the camera is able to move at a certain point, and that you're able to switch between one camera to the next, and so on. So anyway, so back to No Time for Sergeants. So everything is all very limited. It has to work within a limited space. Whereas when you adapt this into a feature film, you can flesh out some scenes a bit more. You can give more range and so forth. So, but still, I mean, again, this actually was the moment that launched his career. And Andy Griffith again would do that with No Time for Sergeants, and then eventually you get to the Andy Griffith Show. So the next episode, A Wind from the South, to be honest, I've only seen it once, and I didn't really care that much for it. It supposedly takes place in Ireland, and it's a love story, and it just didn't really do it for me. So if anybody knows about that story, I apologize if I'm not giving it its due. But again, all of these episodes are all about my thoughts and impressions of these films. So that's what I thought. So I'm sorry, I didn't give it that much attention. The next broadcast is Requiem for a Dream, which I have seen before. And this would also be later turned into a feature film as well. This is another Rod Serling penned play, and it looks at the moment when I think it's supposed to be a midweight, but a boxer who is had his last fight. He's had such a long career and has taken so many blows that the doctor determined that, you know, if you if you send this kid to the ring again, he's not gonna make it. So he's pretty much done. And then the question is, okay, now what? And he's played by Jack Palance. The question is, okay, now what am I going to do? Especially since for a good fair chunk of his life was dealt with boxing. So it's, you know, what am I going to do now? What am I? And it's looking at that next step. And there's two sort of paths he ends up sort of straddling, and one is inspired by a social worker he meets. She's trying to help him to, you know, have a, you know, more normal life, or to have a life that is fulfilling for him and maybe fulfilling and hopefully fulfilling for others. And one of the things he puts into his head is that maybe you can work with children. Yeah, obviously the sun is setting, so I'll rectify that soon. But anyways, there's that one path, or then there's the other path, which actually is related to his trainer, because there's some money owed, and there's eventually a betrayal that's revealed. Why not pursue professional wrestling? And in the end, he believes that he has a certain dignity and value, and that it should remain. You know, no matter how depressed he feels about this change, he does want to go out with some dignity, and in so many words, he does. So, anyways, so that's Requiem for Heavyweight. Then the next one is Bang the Drum Slowly, which is deals with baseball and friendship, and this is where you get into Paul Newman. And it's something that I didn't really care that much for, but I need to revisit it again, because I just need to revisit it again, so I'm not going to talk about it as much. So again, I apologize for that. And then another broadcast on there is The Comedian, another Rod Serling penned work, and this looks at ambition. You know, this looks at the ugly side of ambition, and also of success. You have a well-known sort of lowbrow entertainer, played very well by Mickey Rooney, who has. I mean, if you think of Mickey Rooney as, oh, he's kind of funny, but he's able to exude some intense seriousness, and you kind of like, whoa. He's a guy that wants to climb to the top, and he does so by any and all means necessary, and is not afraid to berate writers, to berate technicians, and even to berate family. And it's, you know, and a lot of people are at their various breaking points at this, and so it's. I don't want to give too much away, but that's kind of what that is. And then finally, and this is probably my favorite of all of them, is Days of Wine and Roses, which also became a feature film. It's a story of a couple who meet by booze. So here we get an abstract menage a trois: you, me, and booze. And what that does to the couple. So it is a melodrama that centers on alcoholism, and I really enjoyed that one, and it's because I'm not an alcoholic, but I know people who are, and I have a family history of it, and I know in so many ways I know what that does. And it's nice to see that portrayed in a very genuine and even a very sympathetic way. So it's a now you think it can come off as an after school special or like a more, but it's done with it's done with humanity and dignity, and there is a genuineness to it. It's not preachy at all. It just shows what it can do to people, and I really appreciated the sincerity in that, and that was live television at its best, is when it's able to illuminate various conditions and situations and make light of certain things and do it in a very sometimes entertaining way, sometimes in a very serious way, hopefully in a very moving way, and it's that's why it's called the golden age of. That's why it's appropriately called the golden age of television. Now, the reason why it is called the golden age of television is because when PBS in the 80s decided to rebroadcast some of these plays and performances, it was all done under the banner of the golden age of television, which in one sense it does sound kind of like self-congratulation, which academies seem to do, like the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and the Academy of the Television Arts and Sciences. I think I got the name wrong, but they love patting themselves on the back. It's like, yeah, look at what we did. So on the one hand, it is kind of self-congratulation, but also at the same time, when you really look into like what was made, who was involved in this, I mean, it really did, in some sense, set the stage for further developments that would come about in cinema. I mean, I would say that live television had every much bit of influence on what would become the new Hollywood, as much as cinema verite, as Italian neorealism, and nouvelle vague. So, while certainly Europe provided a catalyst for a lot of it, but I think it also could be found in America as well. So in other words, that it wasn't just Europe that inspired a certain cinematic creativity in America. It was already there. It was just brought up more to the surface. So I would say if what I said sounds interesting, definitely check it out. If you have, and also if you believe that there was once something good in television, that it wasn't all just, it also wasn't just sitcoms and crime dramas and nowadays reality TV. If you feel like there was more to it than that, then definitely check it out. And as I said, this is where a lot of big names got their, or who would become big names down the road. This is where they all got their start. So it's interesting to see in that respect. So yeah, and that was the golden age of television. And until next time, take care.